It seems recently researchers at State University of New York determined that descendants of immigrants to the United States typically lost the ability to speak their mother tongue by the third generation. Something similar, but far more serious, seems to be happening with Christians in an increasingly post-Christian culture. It seems that each successive generation is losing the understanding of, not to mention the will to, live by Christian sexual morality. I would add Christian values, Christian understanding, Christian worship. 2 years ago, a Pew Research survey found that half of American Christians think casual sex is, quote, sometimes or always, end of quote, morally acceptable. Half the people said this. And that probably doesn't include teenagers who weren't surveyed. The slight silver lining in that survey was that evangelical Protestants were by far the least likely group to express acceptance of casual sex. Many of them did, but it wasn't the high number. This new analysis calls into question just how committed the children of evangelicals are to Christian teaching in this area. The larger trend with each generation among American evangelicals increasingly adopts the attitudes of the wider culture toward just about everything, sex and marriage included. This time the behavior in question wasn't casual sex, but cohabitation. Now, cohabitation is about sex, no matter what the cohabitors might want to tell you. But why would you want to cohabit? Well, I don't want to get married. Why wouldn't you want to get married? Well, because that's a legal thing, and I might want to just walk away. And I don't need no law to tell me that I love my wife. Yeah, I know. In 2019, Pew Research reported that a majority, 58%, of white evangelicals said cohabitation is acceptable if a couple plans to marry. Over half of people presenting themselves as born-again children of God taking a stand directly opposed to their God's position because it makes sense to them. Views on cohabitation become noticeably less Christian the younger the respondents are. As early as 2012, the General Social Survey found that over 40% of evangelicals in their 20s agreed that cohabitation is acceptable, even if a couple has no express plans to marry. Earlier this month, David Ayers at the Institute for Family Studies found that nearly half of evangelical Protestants between the ages of 18 to 22 who were not currently cohabiting or married said they would probably or definitely cohabit in the future. Still, as discouraging as the attitudes of these young evangelicals are toward sex, behavior is what's most effectively eroding within the Christian community. Among those ages 23 to 44 who had already cohabited, we used to call that, what do we used to call that in the, it wasn't adultery. What was it? Fornication. Now it's cohabiting. 65% indicated they would likely or definitely do it again. An important caveat here is the same as it is in most cases with these kinds of surveys. The religious commitment of the individual makes the largest difference in their answering. Young evangelicals who attended church at least twice a month before the pandemic were the least likely to approve of shacking up. Twice a month. 1 hour, twice a month. That means they missed at least 2/3 of the essential meetings of the church. and it still made a difference. Across all groups analyzed by Ayres, cohabitation had become, as he put it in an article at Christianity Today, quote, a new norm, end of quote. How can this cultural assimilation be slowed? I want to know how this cultural assimilation got started and happened in the first place. Oh, that's right. It's called absentee parents. Church as entertainment. Cell phones, iPads, iPods, gaming. Parents who are busy. How can the next generation ever be convinced of the sacredness of marriage as a norm worth preserving and living if they don't ever see it? Wait a minute, that's the point, isn't it? The enemy of your soul is doing this. He's being successful. He tried it for thousands of years. It's just people were smarter. People had a greater God consciousness, a sense of, I don't want to do wrong. It's all gone today. When it comes to immigrants, there's an analogy in here somewhere. Research by one immigrant grad student at the University of Alberta found that speaking the native language regularly at home is the crucial first step in passing the mother tongue from parent to child. Of course, that's a basic principle, and it's very simple along with it. Why would not the spoken word be valuable in passing on moral values and behavior? Regular instruction in the faith by parents and pastors is what the church calls catechesis. Heard of catechisms? Well, this is, when you go to the catechism, what you're doing is you're involved in catechesis. The kind of catechesis necessary for this cultural moment not only involves the what of biblical morality, but the why. And then the visual, the living it out in terms of the how. According to Ayres, the lack of a reason given for God's rules is a key factor behind young evangelicals drifting into behaviors common in the wider culture. They know the rules. They just don't know why. Parents and others should evaluate what is true and good, build values from that, and allow that evaluation to shape behavior. But today, too many Christians are living upside down. They are unthinkingly embracing behaviors common in our culture, behaviors that begin to shape their values and end up with an ultimately non-Christian worldview. Now, I'm old. I'm a cynic. I would question whether these upside-down people are truly Christians at all. If you don't buy into the values, why not? Is it because your heart isn't oriented that way? And if your heart is not oriented that way, you're not saved. But we can't say that out loud. Biblical salvation changes the heart, not the brain, not the desire, the heart. Our body's want to changes, is now oriented toward that which pleases, that which glorifies God. Of course, you got to read your Bible, you got to go to church, you got to talk to other Christians who know before you can figure that out. If you call yourself a Christian and none of that is your reality, then you better check your heart. For any parents, grandparents, teachers, pastors who want to see the next generation follow Christ in this culture, catechesis is not an option. Instruction, line upon line, precept upon precept, living it out, challenging people to understand it in terms of its behavior. Today, the Christian view of sex and marriage is like a foreign language, and the wider culture is actively catechizing them. Christians are playing catch up. Never was before. It is today.